What if I told you that after a life of cinematic brilliance, Charlie Chaplin's final act was something straight out of a dark comedy, one that unfolded after he passed away? In 1978, just months after his death, the unthinkable happened. Chaplin's body was stolen from his grave. But this was no simple act of vandalism. It was a bizarre and desperate scheme to hold his body for ransom. Welcome to one of the strangest and most macabre stories in Hollywood history. A story that sees the world-famous silent film star, even in death, caught up in a plot that blends tragedy and farce. So sit back as we unravel the curious case of Charlie Chaplin's stolen coffin. Before we continue, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the White Light YouTube channel. We're new here, but if you like stories like this, we'll be giving you a lot more of them in the future. Thank you. Charlie Chaplin was more than just a filmmaker. He was a global icon who brought laughter and heart to millions. With his signature bowler hat, cane and mustache, his character, the Tramp, became a symbol of resilience and humanity. From the silent era classics like The Kid and City Lights, to the biting satire of The Great Dictator, Chaplin's genius transcended words and time, leaving an indelible mark on cinema. In the 1950s, after facing political scrutiny in the United States, Chaplin settled with his family in Switzerland. There, in the peaceful village of Corsier-sur-Vevey, he spent his later years in relative seclusion, far from the Hollywood spotlight. On Christmas Day in 1977, at the age of 88, Chaplin passed away peacefully in his sleep, ending a remarkable life filled with both triumphs and controversies. He was laid to rest in the small cemetery near his home, a fittingly serene resting place for a man who had touched so many lives. But little did anyone know, this quiet corner of Switzerland would soon become the unlikely setting for a crime so audacious and surreal, it seemed almost scripted. A posthumous twist in the tale of one of the world's greatest storytellers. It was a cold, quiet night in early March of 1978, when two shadowy figures crept into the cemetery, armed with shovels and a rather absurd plan. These men were not typical criminals. Roman Wadis and Gancho Genev were car mechanics, one from Poland, the other from Bulgaria, both struggling to make ends meet in Switzerland. Desperate for money and driven by a dream of starting their own business, they hatched a scheme that was as ridiculous as it was morbid. They decided to dig up the body of Charlie Chaplin and hold it for ransom. Under the cover of darkness, they worked tirelessly, digging through the frozen ground until they reached the heavy oak coffin containing the remains of the legendary filmmaker. They loaded it into a car and disappeared into the night. It was almost a cinematic scene, one that, in a strange way, echoed the comical and chaotic capers Chaplin himself might have crafted. But now, with Chaplin's body in their possession, reality hit. What were they actually going to do with the coffin? How were they going to carry out their genius plan? They buried the casket again in a cornfield not far away from the cemetery, thinking they had secured the bargaining chip that they needed. Meanwhile, the small village woke up to the shocking discovery of an empty, desecrated grave. But no one knew the real reason behind this brazen act. Not yet, anyway. Wadis and Genev were sure they had it all figured out. They believed they could extort a hefty sum from Chaplin's grieving widow, Una, and then fade back into obscurity with their newfound fortune. What they didn't realise is that they were now part of a crazy plot far more complicated than they had imagined, one that would soon spiral out of their control. By now, the news had spread far and wide. The grave of Charlie Chaplin had been desecrated, and his body was missing. The world was in shock, and the Chaplin family was left in a state of disbelief and grief. Amid the confusion and speculation, the true motive behind this bizarre crime finally emerged. It came in the form of a chilling phone call to Una Chaplin, Charlie's widow. The voice on the other end was calm but insistent, demanding a ransom of $600,000 for the return of her husband's body. It was a staggering sum for the time, and one that the thieves believed would solve all of their problems. But they were about to discover that holding one of the most famous men in the world for ransom, even in death, would not be as straightforward as they had hoped. As soon as the ransom demand became public, the media went into overdrive. and so did the opportunists. Una began receiving multiple ransom demands from people trying to take advantage of the situation. The real kidnappers, desperate to prove they were the ones with the body, sent a photograph of the casket placed next to a freshly dug hole in the cornfield. This grim evidence convinced the family and the police that they were indeed dealing with the actual grave robbers. Una, displaying remarkable composure amidst the chaos, decided to cooperate with the authorities. She pretended to negotiate with the criminals while the police tapped her phone and set up surveillance all around the village. It was a delicate game of cat and mouse, with the kidnappers using different public phone booths around the Lausanne area to make their calls, trying to stay one step ahead of the law. But the authorities were relentless. They mapped out over 200 phone booths and kept a constant watch, hoping to catch the thieves in the act. It was a painstaking process, but they knew it was their best chance to crack the case. The stage was now set for a high-stakes pursuit, as the hunt for Chaplin's body and the men who had dared to steal it intensified. As the days turned into weeks, the search for Charlie Chaplin's body became a relentless chase. Swiss authorities, faced with an unprecedented case, meticulously tracked every lead. The investigation dragged on for 76 days. It seemed like the grave robbers might actually get away with their outlandish scheme. But then, suddenly, a breakthrough. A slip-up in one of the ransom calls allowed the police to pinpoint the location of the phone booth in use. They quickly moved in and arrested Roman Wardus and Gancho Genev, the two men responsible for the heist. But despite their arrest, the mystery wasn't quite solved. The duo had buried the coffin so hastily that they couldn't remember the exact spot in the cornfield where they had hidden it. What should have been the end of the story became another chapter in this strange saga. The police were left with no choice but to comb through the entirety of the field, using metal detectors to locate the casket's metal handles. But after hours of searching, the metal detectors finally signaled success. Buried deep in the ground, they found the heavy oak coffin, intact and undisturbed. With Chaplin's body finally recovered, the strange and morbid case was finally coming to a close. The robbers, who had believed they could outsmart everyone, now found themselves facing serious charges. Wardus, the mastermind behind the plot, was sentenced to 4.5 years of hard labour. His accomplice, Ganev, received an 18-month suspended sentence, which is quite light for the crime of grave robbing, but nevertheless. Their dream of easy money had crumbled, leaving them with nothing but time to reflect on their audacious and ultimately futile crime. For the authorities, it was a victory, albeit a peculiar one, and for the Chaplin family, it marked the end of a traumatic saga. For Una Chaplin and her family, the ordeal had been a deeply distressing experience. The fact that someone would stoop so low as to desecrate the grave of a loved one was almost too much for her to bear. Yet, Una displayed remarkable grace under pressure, even forgiving the wife of one of the thieves who had written to her seeking forgiveness. To ensure such a grotesque crime could never happen again, the family took no chances with the reburial. Chaplin's coffin was placed back in its original resting place at the Coursier-sur-Vevey, but this time under 2 meters of concrete and also encased in a concrete slab. This added layer of protection would deter any future attempts to disturb his grave, making it abundantly clear that Chaplin would, at last, be able to rest in peace. It's a testament to the absurdity of life that even in death, Chaplin found himself at the centre of a plot worthy of his own screenplays. As the world tried to make sense of this event, one thing was clear. The man who had brought so much laughter and thought-provoking comedy to the world had left us with one last unexpected story. Years later, this unusual chapter of Chaplin's life was immortalised in the 2014 French film The Price of Fame. Directed by Xavier Beauvoir, the movie offered a fictionalized take on the events, blending humor and humanity in a way that reflected Chaplin's own storytelling style. It even featured his son, Eugene Chaplin, and the granddaughter of Dolores Chaplin, adding a personal touch to the narrative. In the end, this baffling incident serves as a reminder that life, like the films of Charlie Chaplin, is often unpredictable, sometimes tragic, and occasionally downright weird. The kidnapping of his body was a darkly ironic epilogue to the life of a man who spent his career turning the hardships and absurdities of life into laughter. Thank you all so much for watching. Please like and subscribe for more content like this.